In this episode, we talk about the Election Commission's unprecedented notices to the Congress and the BJP. We also talk about the previous attempts to provide reservations to all Muslims in Andhra Pradesh. But first, we talk about the Surat Lok Sabha seat and how its BJP candidate won unopposed. Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargava, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. Earlier this week on Monday, the BJP's candidate Mukesh Dalal from the Surat Lok Sabha constituency in Gujarat was declared elected unopposed. This happened after the Congress's nomination was rejected and 8 other candidates withdrew from the contest. When we spoke to Indian Express's Chief of Political Bureau Manoj CG, he told us that this was really surprising from the Congress point of view, because the Congress candidate Nilesh Kumbhani, whose nomination was rejected, had filed 3 sets of nomination papers.
And every set, according to the EC guidelines, need to have the signature of one proposer, one person proposing his candidature. So there were 3 proposers in total in his 3 nominations. And it's a common practice for parties to field a second candidate, which in local parlance is called as a dummy candidate, anticipating if something goes wrong with the nomination of the official candidate.
He says in this case, all the 3 proposers in Nilesh Kumbhani's nomination papers and 1 proposer of the dummy candidate, all 4 of them, gave sworn affidavits to the returning officers claiming that they had not signed these nomination papers.
So when the nomination papers were scrutinized, the returning officer, having taken note of the affidavits that filed by these 4 proposers, that they had not filed these affidavits, so it is considered as a discrepancy in the nomination form. It also amounts to forgery in that sense. So on that ground, the nominations of both the official candidate Nilesh Kumbhani and the dummy candidate Suresh Pawar were rejected.
This, along with the other 8 candidates withdrawing their nominations, including the one from the BSP, led to the BJP candidate winning from the seat. Now, Manoj says that this is a rare instance. Not counting by-polls, there have been just 23 instances of this since independence.
What we are given to understand by the Congress is that it's a complete Congress claim which we cannot verify in that sense, is that the Congress High Command believes there was an attempt to, ensure that the nominations of at least 5 Congress candidates, in the sense were rejected, or to ensure that at least 5 Congress candidates withdrew, on the last date of withdrawal. And all these 5 seats are in Gujarat. So Surat, incidentally, was one of the 5 seats where the Congress High Command knew, there could be some, mischief. So far, the party has not pinned the blame on the candidate, although a section of the Congress believes Mr. Kumbhani, the official candidate whose nomination was rejected, may have been involved, because it is said that those who signed his nomination papers as proposers were known to him, very close to him. So the High Command is awaiting a report from the AICC in charge of the state and the observers. But there is a doubt, at least a section of the party believe that the candidate himself was involved in this.
And what's interesting is that the Congress candidate, the dummy candidate, and the 4 proposers have now gone underground and have been untraceable since Monday afternoon. And when we spoke to Indian Express's Kamal Saiyed, he told us that the BSP Surat president has alleged that the BJP had kidnapped the candidate and forced him to withdraw his nomination.
And the Surat city incident is the first incident in the ongoing election that the first seat across the country has been declared. And we visited houses of 4 proposers and took along with the house of Nilesh Kumbhani and dummy candidate Suresh Pawar on Wednesday. So while reaching to the houses, there was a bit critical experience faced by the correspondent. Myself, we have found that a police cop at 2 places of the proposer who intervene into the process while interacting with the family members of the missing proposers. So police cops have been deployed at the houses of the proposer in a bid to prevent any untoward incident by local police department. So when we checked at the houses of all these 6 people, they all have been found missing, while the house of Nilesh Kumbhani and Suresh Pawar, they were found locked.
And next we talk about the Election Commission issuing notices to both the Congress and the BJP. Yesterday, the Election Commission of India, in charge of conducting free and fair elections in the country, issued notices to these political parties. The commission is seeking their responses to alleged violations of the Model Code of Conduct by the star campaigners. Now, this move is unprecedented because in the past, such notices have been served directly to the candidate or the star campaigner concerned. When we spoke to Indian Express's Ritika Chopra, she told us more about it.
This is unprecedented, where a complaint pertaining to an individual is actually being referred to a political party for its response. So yes, that's unprecedented.
So ordinarily, for example, in this case, the notices would have been issued to Rahul Gandhi and Narendra Modi, but this time they have gone to JP Nadda and Mallikarjun Kharge.
Yes.
And could you talk about what these particular violations pertain to?
What the commission has done is that it has forwarded complaints pertaining to the Prime Minister and Congress leader Rahul Gandhi to their respective party presidents. The complaints pertaining to the Prime Minister have been filed by the Congress and the left parties. And these are basically about Narendra Modi's recent speech on the 21st of April in Rajasthan's Banswara, where, while referring to Muslims, he claims that if Congress were to be voted to power, it would distribute the country's wealth among quote-unquote infiltrators and quote-unquote those who have more children. The Congress has called this a hate speech. And as far as the complaint pertaining to Rahul Gandhi is concerned, this is actually one filed by the BJP in which the Saffron Party had sought action against Gandhi for trying to create, open quote, linguistic and cultural divide in the minds of people of India for electoral gains, stop quote. This is basically pertaining to his speech in Kottayam in Kerala on the 18th of April, where the BJP says that Gandhi has made false allegations against the Prime Minister by saying that Narendra Modi was in favor of one nation, one language and one religion. So these are two complaints that the Commission has forwarded to Mallikarjun Kharge and JP Nadda, asking for the party's response to these allegations by 11 a.m. on the 29th of April.
And Ritika, do we know what these notices could mean for these parties and to what extent can EC even take action against them?
So first of all, the question of what this violation means for a party, I would still like to underline the fact that it's unprecedented. Never before has a political party been asked to answer for an alleged violation by one of its leaders. So all along, it's not as if parties have not been issued notices. Maybe they've been issued notices about, say, a social media post that they would have made, online. But these are specific allegations, about remarks made by individuals. So, we're in uncharted waters as far as the Election Commission is concerned. In the past, why also this is significant is that if you see, the high-profile leaders who've actually been issued notices. In 2007, during the Gujarat Assembly election, Sonia Gandhi was asked to explain why she called Narendra Modi, who was then the Chief Minister of Gujarat. She described him as Maut ka Saudagar, and there was a notice issued to her. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, during his time as the Chief Minister of Gujarat, was also issued a notice. This is a remark that he made with regard to the Congress election symbol, which is the hand, but he called it the Khuni Panja, the bloody hand. In 2014, Amit Shah was issued a notice for his remarks in Bijnor. This was an area adjoining the riot-prone Muzaffarnagar. And made a reference to the fact that Jaj should avenge what happened. And for that as well, he was issued a notice and asked to explain himself. So against the backdrop of these notices that have been issued to very high profile leaders in the past, this of course does stand out. And we don't really know at this point in time what kind of action would the Election Commission take against a party based on its response, because never before have we had such an instance where the party has to... honestly, these are questions that we are grappling with. We've tried asking these questions to our sources in the commission, and they've said that, let's wait for the response.
And what is the EC's argument here? Why serve notice to the party and not to the person who made these comments?
Their argument essentially is that, they are, even as an individual will continue to remain responsible for all the arguments and remarks made in a political campaign, they are saying that they are now trying to also link parties to it, sort of to also hold them responsible for the actions of their star campaigners. And the notice also says that, as officers in the commission have also told us that while we're not absolving the individual, but we're also now trying to hold parties responsible for their star campaigners, because it is at the end of the day the parties, that choose the star campaigners, in fact, reserve the right to also remove. I mean, it's not that they have that right exclusively, but they can appoint or remove a star campaigner. So they should also be held responsible for it.
And in the end, we talk about reservations for Muslims in the country. At an election rally in Tonk in Rajasthan earlier this week, Prime Minister Narendra Modi said that the Congress has often tried to give reservation to Muslims by reducing the quota for SCs, STs and OBCs. And he specifically cited attempts at providing 5% quota for Muslims in Andhra Pradesh as a pilot project, which, according to him, Congress wanted to try in the entire country.
2004 में जैसे ही कांग्रेस की केंद्र में सरकार बनी, उसके सबसे पहले किए गए कामों में था, सबसे पहला काम था चुनाव जीतने के बाद आंध्र प्रदेश में एससी एसटी के रिजर्वेशन में से कमी करके मुसलमानों को रिजर्वेशन देने का प्रयास। ये एक पायलट प्रोजेक्ट था जिसे कांग्रेस पूरे देश में आजमाना चाहती थी। 2004 से 2010 के बीच कांग्रेस ने 4 बार आंध्र प्रदेश में मुस्लिम रिजर्वेशन लागू करने की कोशिश की, लेकिन कानूनी अड़चनों की वजह से सुप्रीम कोर्ट की जागरूकता के कारण वो अपने मंसूबा जो लेके चले थे वो पूरे नहीं कर पाए। 2011 में
Now in this segment, we take a look at the extent to which Muslims in India today get reservation and what Andhra Pradesh has tried to do in the past. And for this, joining us is Indian Express's Apurva Vishwanath, who reports on law for the paper. Apurva, can you begin by telling us the extent to which Muslims in the country today get reservations?
So several Muslim communities get reservation under the OBC quota. So now OBC is an umbrella term we use to describe socially and educationally backward classes. And in India, we use this classes to be synonymous with caste, really, because again, caste is something where one profession is passed down intergenerationally. So it's easy to identify them as a group. So there are several caste groups which qualify for the OBC quota. So broadly, there are 2 criteria that is used to put a particular class under the OBC quota, right? So one is the social backwardness and one is the educational backwardness criteria. For educational backwardness, say for example, the percentage of people who are in higher secondary school or high school is measured. So take say class 10 to class 12 or class 8 to class 10. How many people of a particular caste are in that group? So if their representation is found to be lesser than the state or the national average, then they would be deemed to be educationally backward. And for social backwardness, one of the indicators is the profession that is followed. Say the bunkar community, right? If there are traditional professions where a lot of manual labor is used, there are these identified professions where we will look at whether that is an indicator of social backwardness. These 2 things, among a lot of other aspects, are looked at to determine SCBC, which some Muslim communities also qualify for. So there is a central list and there is a state list. Of course, the central list is what we have is 27% quota in jobs and educational institutions. In states, this varies to a small degree. Say in some states, it could be 28%, some states as high as 32%. But that is how Muslims get quota in India, essentially.
Right, and at this moment, there is reservation for Muslims in states like Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and even Bihar. But here, do only certain groups within the Muslim community get reservation, or does the entire Muslim community get reservation?
So in India, right now, only in Kerala and Karnataka do the entire Muslim community get reservation. In several other states, there is a varying degree. Say in a state like Tamil Nadu, many castes are included, almost all castes are included, you might say. to the exception of one or two upper caste Muslim communities. Even in states like Gujarat, there are several Muslim communities which are included in the OBC list. To what extent do you include is essentially the state government's prerogative. So in Karnataka, for example, Muslims have a sub-quota within the OBC quota, right? So if there is 27% OBC quota, and in India, roughly, we know that more than 40% are OBCs. So in that 27%, say 4.5% will be for Muslims, and the remaining will be for the rest of the country. So why do states make this decision? That's dependent on the Muslim population in that state. A state like Kerala has a higher population of Muslims, and if it feels that in their scheme of backwardness in the state among all communities, if Muslim community is found more or in need of more representation, then the entire community is. So there is a varying degree, and it depends on which caste you are and which group in that OBC quota that you fall in. So it's not as if everybody gets a uniform 27%. It varies, and it's obviously more complicated than it appears to us on paper. So different communities are accorded different degrees of quota when it comes to admissions and employment.
Okay, and the reason we are talking about reservation for Muslims is because the Prime Minister in his speech talked about the attempts that were made to provide 5% quota for Muslims in Andhra Pradesh. Talk about what that involved.
So the Andhra Pradesh experiment was in line with what exists already in, say, Kerala and Karnataka, which is to recognize the Muslim community as a whole as backward. So to give OBC quota for the entire Muslim community, irrespective of which caste they fall in.
And what was the reason that this did not end up happening? What were the challenges that the government faced in trying to implement that?
So in 2004, when Congress Chief Minister Y.S. Rajshekar Reddy came to power, this was one of the first things his cabinet decided to do. And in that attempt, what the state government did was bring in a law without much consultation. So there was a commissionerate for backward classes in the state, whose ex officio head was actually the principal secretary, which is basically the government's representative itself. So they had this committee recommend that Muslims should be given a 5% quota. And the government went ahead and issued a GO, and the quota was implemented. When it was challenged before the High Court raised this issue and said there is Backward Classes Act in the state. And according to the Act, the State Backward Classes Commission must make this recommendation to the state government. So the right process was not followed in this case. So a 5-judge bench of the High Court at that time looked at this issue and raised this key concern that there wasn't adequate consultation and the right procedure was not followed.
And Apurva, in this case, the High Court was also grappling with the question of whether the entire Muslim population in Andhra Pradesh should be entitled to such a reservation. Can you talk about what the High Court had said back then?
So in the judgment itself, this issue is not debated that much. The court doesn't really go into whether the entire Muslim community can be classified as backward or not. That's not something that the court goes into. But the court very clearly says that the idea of giving reservation to Muslims doesn't militate against the Indian secularism concept. That means it's not really anti-secular to look at the OBC quota in a religious framework. Can an entire religion be backward? In this case, the court says, well, that could be, but you haven't followed the process. So the court struck it down on those grounds. Of course, the other issue that the High Court pointed out was that the government had not formulated a creamy layer exception to the 5% quota. It considered all Muslims, irrespective of their, say, income group or other social indicators, to exclude who formed the creamy layer, so to speak, amongst that class. In fact, the court also told the government to go back and have these consultations with the State Backward Classes Commission and within 6 months bring in a new law, right? So it was part of the court's directive. So which is what the state government did again, that they went back, had the Backward Classes Commission. In fact, there was a former High Court judge who headed that commission, who again recommended that there must be 5% reservation for Muslims. And you see that within 6 months, which is sometime in 2005, the state government makes a second attempt.
Right, and they did that by passing an ordinance in July 2005.
Yeah, initially an ordinance, which then gets converted into a legislation. But even that is struck down by the High Court again.
And was this along the same lines?
Yes. In the second time, the High Court again says, we asked you to look at an objective criteria, which is what a host of judgments really say about reservation, right? whether it comes to having consequential seniority in reservations. Many of these concepts, courts have insisted on having data and objective criteria to arrive at these conclusions for the state government. So in the second instance, the High Court says you didn't follow the right procedure. The Backward Classes Commission really started with one question, that whether Muslim community as a whole must be given reservation. They didn't really look at the questions of backwardness as the Indra Sani judgment had set out. So the court again strikes it down, saying this is not the objective criteria that you should have followed. But of course, by the time the High Court gave its second ruling, some of the quota was implemented. So there were some admissions made based on this quota. And the judgment is, of course, then challenged before the Supreme Court, but it's still pending before the Supreme Court. The court hasn't heard the issue and given its final ruling on the 5% quota. Right now, there is a stay operating in Andhra Pradesh that there is no special 5% quota that's implemented right now. But once the Supreme Court gives its final conclusion, the case will be decided one way or the other.
And Apurva, some people have raised an issue about allocating reservation based on religious identity. Could you talk about what the courts have said about this in the past and how the issue of reservation has traditionally been framed?
So if we look at what are our main reservation, if we look at our reservation scheme, right, we have the scheduled caste, scheduled tribe reservation, and then we have the OBC quota. These are the two broad. Of course, now we have the economically weaker section quota as well. But if we're framing the larger question as whether religion can be the basis for granting reservation, that is something that the Supreme Court in this Andhra's case will have to decide. It was supposed to be heard in 2022, but the court first took up the EWS quota issue. Although this was pending for a long time, much before EVS was introduced, the court said that they will pick up the Andhra case after having decided the EVS quota issue. But now, if we look at scheduled caste, scheduled tribe quota, one of the long-standing demands of the Christian community has been about giving SC/ST quota to Dalit Christians. So Dalit Christians and Dalit Muslims do not get SC/ST reservation in India, because the idea is that once you change your religion, you don't really carry your caste. But we know in practical experience that that's not how it works in India. We might say that the Muslim community has no caste or the Christians have no caste in India, but we know that's not how it works. So that also is something that the Supreme Court has to decide. It's pending before the Supreme Court for a long time. So you have SC/ST reservation for Hindus, Buddhists and Sikhs. That is essentially a religious framing of, the SC/ST quota, right? You're saying that it's only in these religions that there is a scheduled caste. And what is a scheduled caste really? It's a caste that has been included in the schedule attached to the Constitution of India. There doesn't exist actually a scheduled caste. It is because it is in the schedule, they get reservation, we call it that. So there is a religious framing of this question. But whether that can be in the OBC quota and as a blanket for the entire religion, which of course is a minority religion, that is something that the Supreme Court will have to decide.
You were listening to Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargava, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.